If you've watched any of my other videos, you will have seen me refer to the Build It and Prosper roadmap. This is this thing here. And I got a recent comment on one of my videos saying, where is the video that explaining this roadmap? And it occurred to me that I actually didn't have a video up there. I did actually create one back in 2017, early part of 2017, when I developed this roadmap. And it was on the Build It and Prosper website, but I subsequently took it down, and I thought, well, I'll put that video back up onto YouTube. But when I actually looked at it, I wasn't very happy with it. So I decided to re-record this and give you an overview of the Build It and Prosper roadmap. Now, there are 3 phases to that, and each of those phases have three sections. And what I'm going to do in this video is just give you a brief overview of that roadmap, and then I will come back and do a video in each of those sections within those phases. So that will be 9 separate videos that will explain it in much more depth. But here I'm just going to give you an overview of the actual process. As I said, there's 3 phases. We have find it, plan it, and build it. And so the find it refers to finding land, the plan it refers to planning the build, and of course build it, fairly obvious, is about building the build. Now, what often people think about the process of building a house is it's all about the build it, but actually it's significantly not so much that. It's about these 2 phases here. And in fact, the most important phase is this one, followed by this one, and this is actually the least important, because if you get those 2 right, this will run relatively smoothly. So find it is about finding a piece of land, making sure it's a viable piece of land, and making sure it stacks up as a deal. Now, if you are a developer, maybe starting out, you want to be able to make a profit, and this is going to have the most significant impact on your profit. If you're a self-builder, you're perhaps less concerned about having a profit, but more concerned about having a desirable place to live, and that's fine. However, you should still not ignore this process, because so often the overruns that you see with many self-builders is because they fundamentally ignored this part or didn't understand this part of the process. So let's just go through it briefly. So detect, that's about finding a piece of land. That may be with outline planning permission, maybe with planning permission, it may be have no permission. The likelihood is that if you are starting out as a developer or as a self-builder, you're going to want to find land that has at least outline planning permission, and I would tend to go for something that actually had full planning permission, because the process of moving from outline to full it can be quite difficult, and you want the least amount of stress. If you've got full planning in place, then you can still alter the design of the house, but it's just that extra hurdle that has already been crossed, so it'll be making it much easier to do that. So there are on-market properties, or on-market propositions, and off-market propositions. Again, if you're starting out, you want to go for on-market because it's just going to make the process that much easier. It's less risky. The off-market tends to be riskier, particularly if you have no experience in what you're doing, and it also can be a long drawn-out process because you may have many more hurdles that you have to cross. However, let's assume that you've found a piece of land that looks right. You then move on to the detail stage, and I have created a checklist. I should mention that I'm a very much process-driven sort of person. I've always created processes in the businesses that I've had. I started this particular business in 2003, but prior to that, I've had many other businesses since 1983, in fact, and I've always created processes in those businesses. So I have a checklist that I go through. This checklist has well over 50-60 questions, and there is essentially 5 areas that I cover. One is the initial viability. In other words, does this look, is it big enough? Is it in an area that I want? Is it in an area that is at least somewhat desirable? The second thing then we talk about is cost implications within detail. So cost implications could be things such as, particularly as a developer, does it have a tile roof? In other words, do the properties around you have tile roofs, or do they have slate roofs? Slate roofs are much more expensive in terms of material, in terms of labor to put in than a tile. So there's a cost implication there. So you need to be aware of the different cost implications. And I have about 12 different things that I look at in cost implications. Then we go on to utilities, again, which can have a cost implication. Is the utilities nearby? Do we need to bring it across a field, or is it relatively close by? In other words, reducing the cost in order to do that. And then we look at planning issues. Planning issues could be something simple as can a fire engine easily access that particular site? Is there a ransom strip? A ransom strip is a small piece of ground that will probably lie in front of the plot of ground, a piece of land that you're looking at, and somebody else owns it. And for you to get from the road onto the plot, you have to cross this ransom strip. Except legally, you're not allowed to do that. And so the way to solve it is piles of money, and hence why it's called ransom strips. So there's a number of things there that you want to look at in terms of planning issues. And then we go on to the final bit, is legal. Is there any legal complications? So this is why I use a checklist to make sure that I cover every base. Now, when I say cover every base, there'll always be something else that comes up, and you come across different things, but that will cover the majority of the things that you need to look at. And then deal, it doesn't mean that you've bought the land, it means that you've got something that's viable, that's going to work for you, and that you can make work. So if you've successfully got to this and you've got a deal, the next thing you want to do is go and speak to the vendor or the owner of the land, and that's what we talk about acquire. It's not actually about acquiring it, but it's about negotiating the terms on which you are going to buy that piece of land, if that's indeed what you're going to do. And it could be in terms of negotiation on price. It could be in terms of, well, it's got outline planning permission, I want to make it conditional that it has full planning before I will purchase and hand it over any money. It could be, as a developer, you might take an option out on the land. So in other words, it may have no planning on it, but I'll take an option out on it. If I manage to get planning, then I will buy that piece of land. Obviously that will reflect the price, the amount of risk and reward that is associated with that. So this is what would happen in this particular part here. Then, assuming we've bought the piece of land, we then move on to approve. So that's getting the necessary consents. If it's got full planning and we're quite happy with the plans as they are, then maybe the only thing that we need to do is to get a building warrant to allow us to actually, or building control, depending on what the terminology is where you live. In other words, to get the documentation to allow you to actually build that, and that can take a few months to acquire that. And then once that's going through, you then start to arrange. So you start to arrange your contractors, who's going to do it. Are you going to have a main contractor, or are you going to use subcontractors? Are you going to project manage it yourself, or are you going to have somebody else project manage it? So that's what you would do here. And again, this will have an impact on your costs and how much it costs you to build. And then finally, with all the approvals and everything in place, you're ready to start. And you would start obviously building the foundations. You put the foundations in, And then the next part is you actually start to build the superstructure, which we call frame. The superstructure, if it's a timber frame kit, will be the actual kit itself, the structural part of it. If it's block that you're using, then it will be the block that will be the frame, and then you're going to put a roof on that and bring it up to wind and watertight. In other words, it's at the point where it's dry inside, irrespective of what the weather is, and it means that people can be working on that irrespective of what the weather is. Weather has an impact on building, and particularly when there are tasks that need to be done outside, and that can often end up in some delays. The build then progresses, and then you come to fix, which is essentially turning that shell into a livable and habitable property. So that's everything that goes in there, from the electrics to the plumbing, to the finishings, and the painting and decorating, and obviously outside there's work to be going on, putting in the drainage, and finally the landscaping. And therefore you go through this process, and you at the end have either a saleable asset, or if you're a self-builder, a house that you can move into and live and enjoy. So if you enjoyed this video and you would like to understand those processes in more detail, and you haven't already subscribed, then subscribe now and be notified. Make sure you hit that notification bell, because then you'll be told when the next video is being released. As I said, I'm going to make 9 further videos on this subject, giving you much more detail. So I look forward to joining you for those other videos. And if you've got any comments, any observations, please put them in the comments below, and I promise that I will respond.